All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a story that honestly feels like a gripping, cinematic, psychological thriller, except it happens to be entirely based on real historical events and incredibly rigorous psychiatric research. We're going to explore the work of a man who looked at the absolute deepest, most unsettling corners of human experience, and he completely refused to look away.
It's a fascinating question, right? I mean, what actually happens when a rigid, highly empirical worldview, the exact kind of framework we rely on every single day, is suddenly confronted with reports that just shatter our fundamental understanding of reality? How does a trained, elite scientific mind handle the truly impossible?
So, let's start with Act 1, The Door Opens.
Meet Dr. John E. Mack. And let's be clear up front, he wasn't some fringe theorist working out of a basement. He was a highly respected professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and a 1977 Pulitzer Prize winner. Now, in 1990, he was introduced to the alien abduction phenomenon. And, as you'd probably expect from a Harvard academic, his initial reaction was total, absolute skepticism. He assumed these stories were just intense dreams or maybe delusions, but then he started actually listening to the patients.
The clinical problem Mack ran into was just fascinating. You see, the people reporting these events weren't looking for a book deal. They weren't trying to get famous on the tabloids. They were terrified. Many of them were highly successful professionals who were scared to death of losing their jobs or being labeled as crazy. But the real issue for Mack, their stories were way too consistent. Down to the most minute, unpublished details, these accounts matched up perfectly. It simply couldn't be dismissed as a standard fantasy or some shared delusion.
Which brings us to Act 2, the investigation.
76. By the end of 1992, Mack had seen well over 100 individuals referred to him for these anomalous experiences. But he didn't just blindly accept every single story that came across his desk. Out of all those referrals, he focused strictly on 76 cases. Why? Because those 76 met his incredibly rigorous, incredibly strict criteria for a genuine abduction case. He was looking for intense, appropriate emotion, and a total lack of any underlying mental condition that could otherwise explain the story.
And here's where Mack found a massive gap in the research. Standard psychiatric explanations, things we usually rely on, like sleep paralysis, dissociation, or psychopathology, they just couldn't account for the evidence in front of him. I mean, how do you explain physical marks that heal inexplicably fast, or multiple independent sightings of the exact same event, or the sheer narrative consistency among people who lived completely different lives and had never even met? The standard medical textbooks were literally coming up empty.
So, the really crucial point here is how Mack actually worked with these individuals. He treated the experiencer as a co-investigator. He didn't just lock them in a clinical box and study them. To bypass the massive, heavy walls of trauma these people had built up, he used modified relaxation and hypnosis. And he constantly focused on the breath as a grounding motif, prioritizing their psychological safety and well-being above absolutely everything else. Because, at the end of the day, he wasn't there to prove aliens existed, he was there to heal and to understand.
Let's move to Act 3, The Phenomenon.
When Mack carefully guided these individuals through their repressed memories, the narrative almost always followed this deeply unsettling, specific sequence. Step 1 was a sudden shift in consciousness, which was often accompanied by a blinding blue-white light. Step 2, a sudden, terrifying paralysis, followed by a sensation of floating. Step 3, they'd arrive in a strange, enclosed space, usually described as a craft, surrounded by non-human beings. And finally, Step 4, highly intrusive medical-like procedures.
And the details they gave, wow. They paint a picture of this eerie, almost cosmic realism. Experiencers describe the literal physical impossibility of floating right through solid walls, feeling nothing but a slight vibration. They'd wake up with small cuts and lesions that healed impossibly fast. There were blocks of missing time and reports of telepathic mind scanning, where they felt their entire consciousness was just laid completely bare. It directly challenged the very physics of our material world.
Just listen to these words from an 8-year-old boy in the study. He said, "I don't tell anybody. I think that a lot of people I know get scared if they hear weird." That just humanizes the whole phenomenon so profoundly, doesn't it? These weren't attention seekers. Even young children knew, purely by instinct, that sharing this reality meant facing instant mockery. They were carrying this massive, terrifying secret entirely on their own.
That takes us to Act 4, the human cost.
The aftermath for these people was devastating.
Experiencers dealt with severe trauma from procedures that often felt deeply invasive, even rape-like. But perhaps the most fascinating psychological concept Mack identified is what he called ontological shock. Imagine waking up one day and realizing the fundamental rules of the universe, that you are safe in your own bed, that physical walls are solid, that humans are the apex of intelligent life, are completely false. That realization, combined with the constant, lingering fear that these beings could return at literally any moment, utterly shattered their worldview.
Because mainstream society offered absolutely no framework for processing this, Mack quickly realized that support groups were vital. These groups provided a much-needed safe space. Finally, these individuals could speak their truth, they could process that massive ontological shock, and they could explore the meaning of what happened to them without being immediately labeled as crazy. Community literally became their lifeline.
Now Act 5, Transformation. This is where the story takes a twist. Over time and through the therapeutic process, Mack began noticing a massive expansion in the experiencer's consciousness. The beings were frequently reported transmitting these dire, almost apocalyptic warnings about humanity's destruction of Earth's ecology. And, as a result, the experiencers developed an intense, heightened sense of the sacredness of nature. They actually evolved from feeling like helpless victims into feeling like active cosmic participants. It morphed into an intense spiritual awakening.
And one of the most mind-bending concepts to emerge from all of Mack's research was this idea of a dual identity. Over time, many experiencers reported feeling that they possessed both a human and an alien nature. They felt they were quite literally a bridge between two species, undergoing what they described as a reintegration of a split-off soul. They actually began to empathize with the beings, viewing the encounters not just as a horrific intrusion anymore, but as a deeply complex interspecies merging. As one experiencer named Scott put it, and this is a great quote, "They're getting us trained to get us to a point where we can deal with them." You see how the dynamic shifts entirely? It moves away from being a straight-up horror story and turns into this difficult, collaborative preparation for a future where humanity might have to step onto a much, much larger cosmic stage.
Finally, Act 6, the final question. So the real takeaway here is understanding the legacy John Mack left behind. Mack didn't necessarily set out to prove the existence of literal nuts and bolts spacecraft flying around our atmosphere. What he did do, however, was expand the very domain of psychiatry itself. He bravely refused to force raw, uncomfortable data into pre-existing, comfortable little categories. He treated people suffering from completely anomalous trauma with profound empathy, and in doing so, he fundamentally challenged the rigid materialist paradigm of modern science. He proved beyond a doubt that these are authentic, life-altering human experiences, entirely regardless of their ultimate origin.
Actually, the New York Times Book Review summed it up perfectly. Despite the intense controversy his work generated, and trust me, the academic pushback at Harvard was fierce, his empathetic objectivity was recognized by many as a brave, necessary expansion of how we view the human mind. His work became a sign of an urgently needed transformation in how we understand our place in the universe.
Which leaves us lingering right on the boundary between physical reality and cosmic consciousness with one final, incredibly powerful question. If these reports cannot be explained away by mental illness, if the trauma is undeniably real, and the transformative growth is a documented fact, well then these experiences are authentic. But authentic in what sense? Are they physical events? Are they intrusions from another dimension? Or perhaps an awakening of the human spirit orchestrated by the cosmos itself? I'll leave you to ponder that one. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the impossible.